Hi, my name is Lena and welcome to my channel, and this is our last video about the Silmarillion by Tolkien. It's a buddy read with Lukash from the channel Luukashist Books, and this time we were reading two parts. First one, Akalabeth, the downfall of Numenor, and the second one, of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. So I consider Silmarillion the history of elves, and these two parts look to me more like the history of man. So the downfall of Numenor actually reminded me a lot of Atlantis. So after Morgoth was vanquished but not killed, he was captured and he is held captive outside the world, outside Arda, and he cannot come back. So after this, the Valar, they allowed elves not to come to Valinor because elves left Valinor out of their free will, out their own free will, and they cannot come back. But they can back to the Toll of Erisea, the island near Valinor, and some of the elves go there. For men, three houses of men that fought alongside the Valar against Melkor or Morgoth, for them there was created a new land. So an island was raised in the middle of the sea, and the island called Numenor. And those three houses of men came to live in this island, and they were prosperous, and they kept their friendship with elves, and they learned different lores from the elves, and their kings were posterities of Elros, who was half elf, half human, who was a so he was half elf, half human. He is a posterity of Baron and Lucian, and he decided to become a man, to stay with the man and to be king of men. So his posterities are kings of Numenor. And at first they are friends, they are elf friends, and they are faithful to the Valar and to the Iluvatar, and they are prosperous, and they live longer than ordinary men, and they are taller and fair. So they're better looking than ordinary men, and they're stronger than ordinary men, and they're not exactly happy with all that because they're still mortal, but nevertheless they sometimes come to Middle Earth and they play gods to men in Middle Earth. They teach them different skills, different lores. They build some of the fortresses. Then and they try to fight Sauron. And he comes with them to Numenor willingly as a captive because he understands that he cannot fight them in any other means but the usual treachery and wit, treachery and lies. So he manages to convince them, the kings of Numenor, that Melkor or Morgoth is the only god who actually can give them immortality. And they prosecute and they pursue faithful people. The people who are faithful to the Valar and Melkor and who are elf friends. Such people, they actually sacrifice to Melkor in Numenor. And the only thing that was forbidden to the kings of Numenor, to the people of Numenor, is to come to Valinor. And Melkor convinced them that the land, the Valinor itself, gives immortality to elves and to the Valar, and so they come there, and they cause a reshaping of Arda. So as a result, there is a natural or unnatural disaster occurs, and Numenor comes back under the water, so it sinks. That's why it reminds me of Atlantis. And some of the lords of Numenor, great lords of Numenor, survived because they were actually in ships. And those are, so Elros had a son and a daughter, and those are posterities of this daughter. And they are very well known to us. They are Elendil and Isildur. So they survive and they come to Middle Earth. This downfall of Numenor, it also tells us about the rings of power. And by the way, in this natural, unnatural disaster, the body of Sauron dies. So his fair body, that elf-looking or man-looking, that allowed him to be to seem beautiful and fair to men and elves, this body perishes. But unfortunately, he does not die because he is a Maya, and he comes back to Middle Earth and he builds himself a body. It's not actually described in the book, but he builds himself a body, and it's not necessarily looks like elf or an elf or a man. So it tells a bit about the rings of power, different rings of power, and about Palantirs, the stones that lords of Numenor brought with them to in the ships to Middle Earth, and it tells a bit about the White Tree of Gondor, the history of this White Tree of Gondor. And in the second part of the Rings of Power and of the Third Age, I'm sorry guys, I think the same story is given, and it tells more about the three elvish rings of power. It tells about the coming to the Middle Earth of Gandalf and Saruman and Radagast, and it tells about the broken sword, and it tells more about the Aragorn's family. Oh, I wish that it would tell more about the Rangers and about the time Aragorn spent as a ranger. And I wish it would tell about Arwen's mother and about Legolas's mother, because I feel like these women were significant and they suffered some ill fate, but I know nothing about them. I think it's probably because I have never read the materials given at the end of the Lord of the Rings, and I definitely should do it. All in all, I kind of think about this book both as mythology. This is my copy of myths of ancient Rome and ancient Greece, so it's kind of mythology for me. And on the other hand, it's ancient history, and this is my copy of Herodot's history. It's kind of, I cannot call it a collection of stories or a cycle of stories, because it's more like an ancient history. Not every historical person in this Silmarillion and other two chapters has its own story. It's more like they play a part in a bigger story, in the story of realms. All in all, I enjoyed it as a mythology and as an ancient history. And I like the world very much, and I like the style of the author. So it's a victory. I have finally read it, and I enjoy it. I would advise you, it was kind of difficult to get through the chapter 14 of Beleriand and its realms, the chapter that tells which Elvish tribe were settled in and start living in Middle Earth. If you have difficulties with it, and if you have such a map, which actually tells which Elvish king dwells in which realm, for example, Hislum, Fingolfin, or Nevrast, the king is Turgon. So if you have such a map, you can skip it for a time being, this 14th chapter. It's a major chunk of world building. I think I will reread this, and probably more than once. And I think it will be even easier for the second and for the third time. Well, thank you for watching. Goodbye and happy reading.